As you may have seen from the announcement, gentlemen, the Pajama Party rerun is about to be released. Alongside it, the Pajama banners and New Year banners are also returning, with Pikoyuki being the newest addition. So, are any of them worth pulling or building? In short, probably no, but first, let's take a deeper look at these characters first. Starting with Pikoyuki. She is a special support who can dispel a single debuff and apply a critical damage buff. If her debuff dispel successfully removes one debuff, the amount of critical damage she grants is increased. This mainly comes into play during Drumbarker Phase 1, where you need a student capable of dispelling one debuff to move the platform away from the boss's claw attack, preventing your strikers from being stunned for an extended duration. The critical damage buff is certainly nice, but having Nico for Phase 1 is already enough for Insane, Torment, and lower difficulties. Her basic skill simply deals damage, which honestly won't do much considering she is a supporter, so you can safely leave this skill at level 1. Her enhanced skill, probably not really helpful. Her sub-skill however is quite nice. If you have Aimi, the attack speed buff increases Aimi's damage output, allowing her to destroy the cannon parts much more efficiently. So Pikoyuki feels more like a support specifically intended for a main team where Aimi is your main auto-attacking striker. If you do not have Aimi and prefer using Otogi instead, then Pikoyuki loses much of her value, and you are generally better off waiting for Nico instead. She was originally expected to become one of the core students for Drumbarker, and that prediction was correct. However, she truly shines only when paired with Aimi on the same team. And she sees consistent use primarily in Lunatic, where players tend to bring every student capable of dispelling debuffs, while also apply meaningful buff. So, Pikoyuki is ultimately a skippable banner if you do not have Aimi for Drumbarker Torment. For players aiming to clear Insane or lower, she is not a necessity, and you are generally better off saving your Pyrex for the upcoming Fox Squad banners instead. There is also an alternative strategy for clearing Drumbarker Torment that uses Dihiruka as the main DPS. While she requires extremely high investment to perform well, you can simply borrow a fully built Dihiruka from another player instead. Next is Piyuka. She is a heavy armor tank, making her naturally durable against mystic enemies. She was commonly used as an explosive defense debuffer, quite effective as tank with defense debuffer against light armored Jebura. However, the issue is that her defense debuff only benefits explosive damage, which heavily restricts her usefulness. Most players simply prefer using Scanner instead, who provides a similar defense debuff while being significantly more versatile across different content. At the moment, it is still uncertain whether Piyuka will regain relevance in future aids, but one thing is certain, she is currently a skippable banner. Lastly among the Pajama banners, Pinoa. She remains an excellent piercing DPS capable of delivering a massive number of hits, and she is still one of the strongest options for Whack-A-Boat Phase 2. However, she requires extremely high investment to function as the primary carry. If that level of investment is beyond your reach, leaving her at 3 stars is perfectly acceptable. Rather than making her your main DPS, simply use her as a side DPS while directing your buffers toward your primary damage dealer. Outside of Whack-A-Boat heavy armor however, she does not see much use. If you need an alternative, both Neru and Miyu can provide rapid multi-hit attacks. They certainly will not carry the fight, but at least they get the job done, and moreover, regular Neru and Miyu is free to farm, should be easier to you to raise their stars. Now, moving on to the New Year banners. Starting with NY.Fuuka. As a special supporter, she reduces the X skill cost of one selected ally by 50% for a single use. That may not sound like much at first, but her own X skill is very cheap. What makes her especially valuable is that she excels in teams where you only need one major DPS burst per rotation. Moreover, NY.Fuuka is incredibly strong when paired with Dihina. The reason is that when students capable of reducing X skill cost for multiple activations are used on Dihina, the second and third cost reductions mysteriously disappear. That is because Dihina's free follow-up X skill is also counted as an X skill activation, causing those additional cost reductions to be consumed immediately. This is why Ayuzu, Sia, and Yui are not ideal partners for Dehina. As a result, NY.Fuuka remains the only X-cost reduction supporter that naturally fits Dehina's rotation. Sounds like a strong reason to pull NY.Fuuka for Dehina, right? Well, in practice, S-Nagisa generally performs better while also providing a much stronger critical damage buff. Since S-Nagisa was released, NY.Fuuka has gradually seen less and less usage, at least from my perspective as a casual player. She is likely still valuable for highly competitive lunatic score chasing, but that is a different story, and most players at that level have probably owned her since her original release. So if you already own S-Nagisa, you probably won't be using NY.Fuuka very often anymore. Finally, NY Haruna. She has unfortunately become obsolete. Honestly, I am still trying to figure out where she can be even slightly useful these days. She is an explosive AoE DPS capable of clearing groups of enemies. When she was first released, she was expected to become an excellent choice for Kaiten FX. Then Aru reminded everyone she exists, and she is farmable. If you simply need an explosive AoE unit to delete weaker enemies, Sanako completely solves that problem, as she is capable of deleting mobs regardless of whether they are light, heavy, special, or elastic armor. And let's not forget that Dehina existed. Now, with both Dehina and Sanako returning through the Recollection banner in just a few months, NY Haruna becomes even harder to justify. So there you have it. Overall, these banners are largely skippable. The only student I would still somewhat recommend is NY.Fuuka, and even then, only if you do not own S-Nagisa and need someone to manage Dehina or other high X skill cost DPS students. Otherwise, you can simply wait for the S-Nagisa Fest banner to return. It may take around 8 months, but by then you will likely have several other banners worth pulling as well, making that wait much more worthwhile. If you already own S-Nagisa, then NY.Fuuka and all banners are easy skips. Save your Pyrex for more impactful banners in the future. Alternatively, if you already have the required Fest DPS, you can simply borrow S-Nagisa instead and comfortably manage to clear the raid without pulling NY.Fuuka. For the build, in case you want to utilize them for specific raid bosses, starting with Koyuki, prioritize leveling her X skill and sub skill to the maximum, as her other skills do not provide significant benefits. Her level should also be maxed, to maximize the special to striker stat conversion. For her gear, only maximize the shoes in the first slot and the badge in the second slot. You can safely ignore the third slot, as the watch mainly provides critical rate and critical damage, which do not transfer to strikers. While it does grant a small amount of max HP, the increase is generally insignificant. Keeping her at 3 stars is perfectly sufficient, as her debuff dispel and critical damage buff is the primary reason you bring her. For Yuka, prioritize her X skill to maximize the defense debuff, basic skill for stronger self-healing, and level both her enhanced skill and sub-skill to improve her survivability. She should be at the maximum level, and all of her gear should be fully upgraded since they are designed for a tank role. 3 stars are perfectly fine. All you really need from her is the defense debuff against light armor enemies. For Noah, she should ideally be at UE 50, if you intend to use her as the hyper carry piercing DPS for Whack-A-Bode Phase 2. Maximize everything. Her level, skills, and gear, with one exception, the watch. It does almost nothing for her because her X skill cannot land critical hits, making the critical stats largely wasted. As for NY.Fuuka, every skill is worth investing in. Max her X skill first, as it strengthens both her critical damage buff and lowering the required cost from 3 to 2. Her basic skill provides a shield that can save your students during critical moments. Raising it to level 7 is generally sufficient and noticeably improves the shield's durability. Her enhanced skill increases her healing, which also strengthens the shield. Level 7 is more than enough here as well. Her sub-skill, which increases critical damage for all allies, should be maxed. For her gear, simply maximize everything. Keeping her at 3 stars is already sufficient. Finally, NY Haruna. There are no build recommendations for her. Doing so would simply be detrimental to your resources. And that should be all. As always, Godspeed.